59. It is the football off season. He is the mastermind of the pigskin. That is Joe Lisi. I am Ben Stevens. Lisi guy, we're together up until 1 p.m. Eastern time on this Tuesday afternoon, ahead of what could be a very big day in New Orleans. Kind of been the focal point of the football universe the last few weeks. Of course, Super Bowl 59. But Joe, a big meeting happening tomorrow in the Big Easy between the Big Ten and the SEC. Basically, the Power 2 now in college football. Some reports earlier this week about the future of football's landscape as it pertains to the college football playoff in potential expansion in control by the Big Ten and the SEC that we'll dive into throughout this hour. We'll look at the odds for 2025 as we started to examine yesterday, and of course, any NFL news and notes that you need, we'll dive into here on FFC.
Yeah, and it's amazing that college football takes front and center stage. Yeah, it's a little cold out there, battling the cold. But it's amazing, Ben, that we just had 1 year with the college football playoff expanded to 12.
Yeah.
And already in the offseason, they're looking to expand it even further, and the talks are underway. Will it ever stop? Can we at least concentrate on the product as a whole, trying to make it better as it relates to NIL and as it relates to maybe, spring ball? No. We have to expand it before we even, try to tweak the 12-team playoff. This is just another recipe of disaster. It's another recipe of why college football, the executives are pigs and gluttons because bigger is better and they just want more. And they're slowly killing the product. Even though it was a fantastic season, this has a recipe for disaster long-term for college football.
I was a fan of college football playoff expansion to move in front of 4, to expand it to 8 or 12, because it seemed to be Joe, a sign of equity. More teams in contention for a championship in those college football playoff spots, in large part. We saw that in 2024. Does the format need to be tweaked? Absolutely. Could there be a couple of fixes? No doubt about it. Joe, they might not tweak it. They might not fix it because who cares if we only have one more year of a 12-team college football playoff and not a 14 or 16-team college football playoff starting in 2026. And Joe said it right there. The powers that be in college football are filled with gluttony, not to eat and wine and dine, but for the almighty dollar. So perhaps another deadly sin known as greed is the true issue. Because this is not done, Joe, for any other reason except money. The college football playoff expanding to 12 was also done for additional revenue. There is no doubt about it. And the money contingency that comes with reaching the college football playoff. But it was also done to make it a more equitable landscape, to have more teams in competition for a national championship. This is not that. This is power, control, and revenue. And that is what the Big Ten and the SEC, now seen as college football's overlords, are trying to enact in the coming weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the kids and the student athletes are the ones to suffer to a capacity. Sure. Now they're getting paid, and rightfully so as it relates to NIL. But again, look at the situation with Oregon State and Wash State. Where are those teams in year number 2 of the college football playoff or expansion, right? Those programs are dead, almost like a non-existent. You might as well put them on the same level of almost an FCS program at this point, right? Because bigger was better to break up the Pac-12 and, really solidify the Big Ten and others and the Big 12, exponentially. And again, it's great for us, the fan, to some capacity, but there is a tipping point. You're going to have now a situation where we're top-heavy. We were already top-heavy to begin with. Now we're going to be completely top-heavy. And at the end of the day, the end result of the college football playoff isn't really what it was meant to be. It was supposed to give the smaller schools and the group of 5 schools an equal opportunity to play with the big boys, and that's not what we're seeing right now.
So let's get into brass tacks. Here is what we are discussing. A bombshell report, and deeply reported by Yahoo's Ross Dellinger late on Sunday evening about a meeting upcoming this Wednesday in New Orleans between Big Ten and SEC athletic directors. That really dates back to last summer. In our first year of expansion, the Big Ten and the SEC, understanding they are the Power Two in the Big Four, or maybe the Big Two in the Power Four, that they wear the pants and they have the money. They walked into these boardrooms and they said, listen, unless you give us what we want, more automatic berths to the college football playoff so we can fatten our bottom line, we might blow this whole thing up and just have our own postseason invitational. So they eventually came to an agreement. The 10 conference commissioners of the 10 conferences in FBS college football and Notre Dame's AD as well, all agreeing basically on a memorandum that allows the Big Ten and the SEC some sort of authority over the rest of the sport. And Joe, based on this reporting from Ross Dellinger, the Big Ten and the SEC plans to exercise that authority and control as momentum for a 14 or 16 team college football playoff beginning in 2026 continues to build. That would give both the Big Ten and the SEC 4 automatic bids to this college football playoff, so either half or more than half of the CFP field. It would also lead to a scheduling arrangement between the Big Ten and the SEC to have some brand names and marquee matchups throughout the regular season. It would also expand the SEC conference slate from 8 games finally to 9. But basically, Joe, all of this is done not just to have brand names across the sport, but to sweeten that bottom line, to make the pot even larger for these two teams and make the revenue and monetary gap between even the highest levels of the sport, the Big Ten, SEC, and the other Power 4 leagues, that would be the ACC and Big 12, all that much wider. Basically, the Big Ten and the SEC saying, this is our world, these are our rules, you can play if you see fit.
Yeah, and it's going to affect the transfer portal because on top of the kids wanting to play for money, right, they also want to play for a national championship. So now if you're guaranteeing certain slots per conference, 4 or 5, whatever it may be, a kid at Colorado State, and I'm just throwing it out there, is definitely going to want to transfer to an SEC contender or a team that can be on the cusp of that, 4-team, permanent slot to maybe solidify their football career. And what happens to those teams like the Colorado States or the teams like, underneath, the teams like Missouri and others within the conference, right? Vanderbilt. What happens to them in the conference? And then on top of that, the players, because their players aren't getting the same amount of money. And then on top of it, aren't guaranteed a shot to potentially make the playoff. It's like a lose-lose for some of these kids that transfer out.
Joe, I'll take it a step further. It's not just Colorado State at the Group of 5 level. It's Arizona State in the Big 12. It's Florida State in the ACC. If there is going to be that large of a financial gap between the Big Ten and the SEC, which there already is a very large bridge to this point, but it would grow even more exponentially so, as really those two leagues would have all of the controlling power in the stakes, along with Notre Dame that has their own individual access and gets to retain all of their money and finances for qualifying for these things. It is going to create a gap that we have never seen in terms of equity in college sports. We'll continue to discuss on the other side of the break what this all means, why it is happening. Will it happen? Will people push back? All of the conversations that need to be had here on Football Full Circle next.
4 out of 5 scientists agree it's smarter to be on SportsGrid. And we're pretty sure that one scientist is still a virgin. He just gives that 5. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network.
The apparent leader of a cult-like group known as the Zizians has been arrested in Maryland along with another member of the group, according to Maryland State Police. 34-year-old Jack Soto was arrested Sunday along with 33-year-old Michelle Zashko of Media, Pennsylvania. They face multiple charges including trespassing, obstructing and hindering, and possession of a handgun in a vehicle. A bail hearing for the two is scheduled for today at Allegheny District Court. The Zizians have been tied to the killing of U.S. Border Patrol agent David Malin near the Canadian border in January and 5 other homicides in Vermont, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, and California. Southwest Airlines is eliminating 1,750 jobs, or 15% of its corporate workforce. It's the first major layoffs in the company's 53-year history. The airline said that the job cuts would be focused almost entirely on corporate overhead and leadership positions, including senior leadership and directors. 11 senior leadership positions, representing 15% of the company's senior management committee, are being eliminated. I'm Trey Westerberg with the SportsGrid News Flash.
Confidence is knowing you're ready to handle whatever comes your way. That's what it feels like to take on your workday with Cintas. They make sure your AEDs are up to date, your fire extinguishers are tested and inspected, your floor mats are cleaned and delivered, and your workwear looks good, feels good, and is freshly laundered with the Cintas Apparel Plus program. So are you ready to take on today? Visit Cintas.com.
Oh, I'm ready!
And get ready for the workday.
Progressive knows finding your new home was a dream come true. You wanted a walk-up with central air and a skylight, and you found it. Now, every Friday night, you get to fall asleep to the sound of your downstairs neighbors' dance parties. Progressive can't save you from your noisy neighbors, but we can save you money when you bundle your home and auto with us. Get a quote at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and other insurers not available in all states.
There's something you should know and always remember. SportsGrid does not increase luck. We're your unfair advantage for the latest sports gaming information. If you're looking for luck, go find a horseshoe. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network. You're listening to Football Full Circle with Joe Lisi and Ben Stevens.
After our very first year of college football playoff expansion, are we in for more in a lopsided CFP that we have never quite seen in this sport? Tomorrow afternoon in New Orleans, athletic directors from around the Big Ten and the SEC, you can consider them the Power Two, the Big Two in the Power Four, are meeting to discuss a plan to possibly exercise their control to force expansion of the college football playoff to a 14 or 16 team CFP model starting in 2026. Joe, the why. Why is this happening? It's money. It's revenue. It's so that if the SEC has to go to a 9-game conference slate, that's additional revenue for a very big game for their television partners of ESPN and Disney. If we scrap conference championship weekend, but we make it a play-in game for the college football playoff, that's a different structure of TV revenue. If we can guarantee a marquee game in a scheduling alliance between the Big Ten and the SEC year in, year out, like we see in college basketball, for instance, Big 12 SEC Challenge, Big East, Big 12 Challenge, whatever it looks like, that's also more marquee windows for TV partners to come back to the drawing board and add on millions of dollars in television revenue. If the college football playoff is expanded to 16 schools, well, then ESPN, who is the controlling media rights partner for the college football playoff from 2026 through 2031, sees it expand to 16 teams. That's more revenue that ESPN would have to spend as well. It is about revenue, Joe. And it is about control, which is even more a sad state of affairs in college sports.
Yeah, and I could tell you it's going to lead to more conference realignment. It's going to lead to potentially a super conference between, the Big Ten and the SEC, because when these other group of 5 schools or even the ACC and the Big 12 are up against it, to maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but in a couple of years, because it will really take effect then, right? 27, 28. Those teams can't compete monetarily and they can't compete from a player perspective in terms of talent. It's just going to be so top heavy that those conferences are going to say, what do we need, the rest of the conferences when our teams are already guaranteed the top, 10 spots out of 16 or 18 or 24. And then what's going to happen is it's just going to be like, hey, let's just take a league of 40, top 40 schools in the nation, and let's just play for all the marbles and everybody else is secondary. And we're going to have a situation, unfortunately, whether it be within 3 years, 5 years, or maybe at the most 10, an NIT situation that we had in college basketball that's basically non-existent come tournament time. And it's unfortunate because now we're killing programs. Forget the group of five. I can tell you this right now. The group of five schools, teams like the Sun Belt that rely on the $1.5 million or the $2 million from, playing Alabama or LSU or, Ohio State, the Akrons, they're going to get murdered just from a revenue perspective. And that's it. It's over. You're going to have SI departments shut down because football funds a majority of the sports. So there you go. We just killed it in less than 5 years.
Yep. That's going to happen. Maybe not to that extent right away, but this is an ever-changing landscape. The only guarantee in college athletics, it is going to look different right now than it did 5 years ago, and will look different 5 years from now than it does at this current moment. Starting this calendar year, with a new academic year that will begin in 2025, we start revenue sharing from from actual member institutions of different conferences around the country, sharing revenue based on the NCAA versus House legislation with college athletes. Direct revenue sharing from colleges and universities with their athletes. It seems like this should have happened a long time ago, but because of those financial implications, Joe, that's why schools like in the Big Ten and the SEC are trying to guarantee an even larger portion of the pot. If it does not seem fair, that's because it isn't, but that is what is happening. There is so much current anxiety, strife, stress, Joe, if you will, about what the sustainable future, if there is one, for collegiate sports in this model looks like, with all the changes we have seen in the NIL era and the revenue sharing that is about to begin. This is why the first thought is not the fan, it's not tradition, it's not even winning championships. It's about revenue, it's about money, it's about the bottom line, and that is very difficult to swallow. Now, instead of just being a doomsdayer, I would caution, Joe, we have had many similar conversations over the past few college football off seasons, right? Started with expansion, Oklahoma and Texas departing the Big 12 to the SEC. The Big 10 following suit the offseason afterward, then the dissolution of the Pac-12 the year after that. All of these changes that have left certain institutions in porous and terrible spots. There is no doubt when you focus on the individual. But for college football as a whole, you see expansion this year, and it was a great thing for the sport. I think it is very hard to argue otherwise. But as that keeps growing, Joe, and as that keeps changing, that's where our reactions to equitable and fair and competing at the highest level, those start to differ and change as well.
Yeah, and you're going to start to see Cinderella, to your point, like Arizona State, dwindle. It won't be part of the sport anymore because it's just not going to be feasible. Not just feasible, but it's not going to be the product on the field either, because you're not even going to have potentially players that are even in the same stratosphere as the top teams in the country. And that's the biggest thing about college football and college athletics is that we live and die with the miracle, the upset, the instant classic. We might get those on a higher level, but we're not going to get the Appalachian States over Michigan anymore. We're not going to get the upsets on a consistent basis that we would see in terms of the college football season, and that's what's unfortunate.
And Joe, when you think about just the logistics of it, if this does come through starting in 2026, it would mean the SEC begins to play a 9-game conference slate. It would mean a scheduling agreement and alliance between the Big Ten and the SEC to play a non-conference game against one another as well in a conference versus conference contest competition. You're going to have 2 other spots to fill with other teams, other leagues around the country. The opportunity seems to dwindle. We have talked about the why, now the what and the how. Next.
There's smart and there's not smart. Not smart is hope as a strategy. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. Keep it here and win. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network. The SportsGrid Radio Network presents This Date in Sports History.
In 1956, former Yankee shortstop Phil Rizzuto signs on as the team's radio and TV announcer.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to New York Yankee Baseball. I'm Bill.
The Scooter was a 7-time world champion and won the AL MVP in 1950 and was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1994.
And if dreams can come true for me.
For SportsGrid Radio, I'm Mike DeMurgis.
The
Technology Minute with George Capalbo.
Full self-driving cars are still not reality, but most modern vehicles now offer some kind of driving assistance like lane keeping or automatic braking. New North Carolina State research tests 3 ways to get a distracted human driver to take control. Number 1, warning bells. 2, spoken instructions.
Please avoid the bridge abutment.
And number 3, a more conversational approach.
Tell me, what did you eat for lunch? By the way, that's a bus.
And the winner, conversation.
I'm not sure where we're going, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually.
Follow me at G Capalbo on X and stay tuned to the Technology Minute for more cool stuff like this.
Pharrell Coast to Coast.
Finland didn't show up for the biggest game for their country in years. They didn't show, so they got their ass beat, and the game was terrible. Don't even try to sell me that was a good game, you or anybody else. Morency, nobody. I want to hear it. The game sucked. I was picking my teeth. I literally started flossing my teeth in the middle of the second period.
It's Pharrell Coast to Coast with Scott Farrell. Weekdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on the home of the winning edge, the SportsGrid Radio Network. Wherever you go, there you are. Download the SportsGrid mobile app and we'll be right there with you. So now you can get the winning edge anywhere. Even while the wife's talking to you. If you've got an earbud. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network. You're listening to Football Full Circle with Joe Lisi and Ben Stevens.
We're live right here on Football Full Circle. It is FFC. Tomorrow in New Orleans, a group of athletic directors from the Big Ten and the SEC are set to meet and potentially chart the future of the college football playoff in CFB. Next Wednesday, Joe, February 25th, so actually just 1 week from today, the College Football Playoff Managing Committee, which is all 10 FBS conferences and their conference commissioners and Notre Dame's athletic director getting together to discuss expansion. As we got that report from Ross Dellinger on Sunday night about possible CFP expansion controlled by the Big Ten and the SEC, the Big Two in the Power Four, if you will, college football's and largely collegiate athletics overlords. Here is what we are discussing. Expansion of 14 or 16 teams. Here is what and how that would appear. 4 automatic bids, Joe, for both the Big Ten and the SEC. 2 apiece for the Big 12 and the ACC. If there is a 14-team college football playoff, that would be 1 automatic berth for the highest-ranked group of 5 conference champ in either 1 at-large spot. If it is 16 teams in the expanded college football playoff future, it would be 4 Big 10, 4 SEC, 2 ACC, 2 Big 12, highest-ranked group of 5, and 3 at-large spots available. Notre Dame does factor into that conversation as well, as we will share in just a moment. Joe, in essence, when we saw expansion this year, in the wonderful product that we saw, despite some lopsided games in the opening round and into the quarters, I think overall a very successful first season and a very successful first college football playoff with expansion in 2024. But I think you would start to lose a little bit of that if you were guaranteeing either half of the 16 spots or more than half of the 14 spots to the Big Ten and the SEC. It would not seem equitable. It would not seem fair.
No, and again, you know, I just think it through. It'll have a trickle down effect every year. You'll lose a little luster and you'll lose a little from the game, and maybe we won't see it, from 24 to 25. But if you look from the start, from 24 to maybe 32, if it's still around, then that's what we're talking about: a slow erosion of the product, a slow erosion of the talent. And you can make the argument, Ben, we look at the NBA, we look at the one and done, the kids going to college and the tournament's great each and every year, but it's still not the same as it was in its pinnacle or when everything was going well. And I understand change is part of the process, but it's supposed to be change for the kids. It's not supposed to be change for the upper echelon of the committee, the guys wearing the suits, the TV executives, ESPN, because they can now broadcast another game, or they have sponsorship rights for Budweiser and this and that. That's not the process of why you have expansion or why you tweak the product. Let's not forget, this is still so-called amateur athletics. This isn't the NFL. This isn't Major League Baseball. This isn't the NBA. What are we doing here? I mean, it's a joke. It's a complete joke. And the fact that the NCAA is still an organization is absolutely mind-boggling and ridiculous. It's just atrocious on every level.
One of the difficult things, Joe, is the NCAA does not crown a national champion at the FBS level. It is the only thing technically under its jurisdiction that is not crowned by the NCAA. Men's basketball, women's basketball, FCS football, so on and so forth, all crowned and governed by the NCAA. But a lot of the regulations at the football bowl subdivision level are by the FBS and now the college football playoff. It should be noted that Notre Dame, by the way, if they were to be ranked inside the top 14 of those final CFP rankings, is guaranteed an at-large spot. Either the only at-large spot in a 14-team model or in a 16-team model, one of the three. Frankly, when the Big Ten and the SEC is guaranteeing 4 automatic bids, it's not like we need more teams out of those conferences battling for at-large spots either, but just to share where it stands. Joe, the question would also be, how do the other leagues feel about it that are not the controlling parties here in the Big Ten and the SEC? The ACC not happy. Big 12 not necessarily happy. ESPN, even the television partner, is worried about access and what that would do, alienating huge demographic areas that tune in to watch said games and follow these conferences. We'll continue that conversation up next on Football Full Circle.
The winning edge. You've got it. But not everybody has it, because not everybody listens to us. But we're working on that. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network.
Progressive presents the SportsGrid Sports Flash. I'm Chuck Sanders. It'll be the U.S. battling Canada in the championship game of the four nations face off this Thursday night in Boston. The Canadians punched their ticket to the final with a 5-3 win over Finland on Monday, while Sweden beat the U.S. 2-1 in a game in which the Americans rested starting goalie Connor Hellebuck, defenseman Charlie McAvoy, and forwards Austin Matthews and Matthew Tkachuk. Brady Tkachuk left the game with an injury, apparently as a precaution. Thursday's championship game is a rematch of their round-robin game last Saturday, which the Americans won 3-1 in a highly physical and emotional contest. The NBA regular season resumes this Wednesday night with the Lakers hosting the Hornets in a makeup game that was rescheduled from January the 9th. Trouble could be brewing for the Red Sox. Third baseman Rafael Devers called it his position despite the signing of free agent Alex Bregman. Bundle auto and home, renters, or condo and save with Progressive. That's the SportsGrid Sports Flash. I'm Chuck Sanders.
With Fidelity Wealth Management, a dedicated advisor gets to know you and your goals to build a comprehensive plan to help grow and protect your wealth. Backed by a team of specialists, they'll analyze all your accounts, even the ones they don't manage, to keep an eye on taxes and provide proactive portfolio insights that can help you unlock your wealth's full potential. Learn more at fidelity.com/wealth. Investment minimums apply. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Hey, I got you something. What's this? Just a little Galentine's gift from JTV.
Do you mean jewelry television? I love their jewelry. They have the...
New customers get $25 off their first purchase of $75 or more. Visit jtv.com/romance.
And their artisan collections? Gorgeous.
Are you going to open your gift?
Oh, yeah. It's the pearl bracelet.
New customers receive $25 off their first purchase of $75 or more. Visit jtv.com/romance.
You're listening to SportsGrid, spreading the winning edge far and wide. Terrestrial, internet, TV, satellite, and don't forget our mobile app.
Face it.
The winning edge is everywhere. Somewhere there's a squirrel frustrated he can't get a phone. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network. You're listening to Football Full Circle with Joe Lisi and Ben Stevens.
So, the Big Ten and the SEC basically acting as college football's overlords in determining the future of the college football playoff. What it would mean not just for crowning a national champion and an expanded CFP again, but also what it would mean for regular season action and scheduling alliances between the Big Two in the Power Four. The Power Four, Joe, now exists as the ACC, the Big 12, the Big Ten, and the SEC. Used to be a Power 5, of course, but we know the Pac-12 is no more. There are still 10 FBS conferences at this level, and when you add in Notre Dame, you basically have Pete Bavacqua, who acts as Notre Dame's AD and their conference commissioner. How does everybody else feel about it? Well, Notre Dame's okay. They control their own revenue. They finish inside the top 14 in the college football playoff rankings, deserving of a spot on the field. They guarantee an at-large spot, and as we saw, Notre Dame controlled all of its finances in a national championship run and was one of the big winners of the first year of the 12-team college football playoff expansion. How does the ACC feel about it? Well, Conference Commissioner Jim Phillips, speaking with Ross Dellinger in this article and how it was all discussed, they're not necessarily as pleased with how things are going. Joe, when Jim Phillips told Yahoo Sports last week, he said, quote, there needs to be fairness and access to the championship. It needs to be a true championship, not artificial and not an invitational. If the SEC and Big Ten were to control half or more than half of the spots in a college football playoff, that would speak to me more as an invitational than an actual true championship run.
I agree with him. And again, we're talking about making the product better for the kids, right? It's not better for the kids. It's better for everybody else but the kids. It's not better for the kids that transfer, that want to transfer closer to home for whatever reason that is, to give them a legitimate shot to live out their dreams and maybe compete for a national championship. It's certainly not helping the schools in the ACC or the Big 12 that just had conference realignment and definitely can't compete now with the likes of the Big 10 and the SEC. You know, solidifying an extra 4 or 3 spots per year for the college football playoff, you're going to have attrition as it just depletes their rosters because those kids that just maybe moved in are going to bolt for bigger and greener pastures. And that's what we're talking about. How does that help the product? How does that help?
It doesn't.
It just helps the Big Ten and the SEC. Now, granted, we know they're the pinnacle of college football, but that doesn't mean they should have the cherry on top now. I mean, college football would be much better by, having parity from top to bottom, maybe from team 1 to team 85. Granted, you're never going to get team 133 or team 130 at the same level monetarily and talent-wise, but you could have maybe 3/4 of college football programs legitimately contend for a national championship. Now it's just going to be a handful of 30 or 40 teams. It's ridiculous.
It's basically a professional league as we see it, especially if the Big Ten and the SEC are the controlling partners. Meanwhile, Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark said that his conference will come to that meeting on Tuesday with all the other conference commissioners with predictive analysis based on participation in the CFP, and basically told Yahoo Sports, I'll be armed with data, meaning he is going to use the numbers and the facts and the stats to try to push off this narrative that the Big Ten and the SEC are the only 2 leagues that matter. But as we said, this is being done for revenue. And part of that mainly is TV revenue and how that comes about. So how does ESPN feel about all of this, as they are the television partner for the college football playoff through 2031? And they're paying $1.3 billion annually to broadcast the college football playoff games. They're a little bit more lukewarm, shall we say, Joe, on this expanded format with the Big Ten and the SEC controlling all of its stake, despite its television partnership with the SEC. As one power broker told Ross Dellinger in his report, quote, you are going to alienate part of the country. Joe, as you shared, you can't really argue the Big Ten and the SEC aren't the biggest leagues. They certainly have the biggest television revenue contracts, and thus, with great money comes great control. But just because your games and your brands are highly viewed and valuable does not necessarily mean you control all that is college sports. And that's where we are trending. And college sports, in large part, is still a very geographic and regional thing. Yes, we have expanded across the country in certain leagues. The Big Ten on the West Coast, the ACC having the schools in Northern California and in the heart of Texas. We understand all of that. The regional footprint has expanded. But, Joe, people in Alabama don't care about what's happening in the Big Ten in large part. People in Michigan aren't really all that infatuated with what's going down in Florida either. So it's not necessarily like you just have that difference and distance around the country being the big deal. And I think ESPN execs are right to express a little bit of concern about how this would alienate certain leagues and groups and just the idea of truly fair competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we just talk about it. We talk about, the ability for kids to transfer out. How, I would hate to be a college coach outside the top 40 right now. I'll tell you that. How do you compete on the same level? How do you make that sale to the kids that are potentially coming in from high school to college, or more importantly, from other schools to help solidify a conference championship? How do you sell them? Well, we don't have a legitimate shot at a solidified spot in the college football playoff. We're about $2 million off of what you got at Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State. But don't worry, we'll give it our best shot. I mean, it's ridiculous. Put it this way, and we always use this. Nebraska is having a tough time competing in the Big Ten. What do you think about these other schools? I mean, it's just ridiculous. How does a school like Minnesota get over the hump? How are these schools going to, and that's in the conference. How are these other schools that are in the group of five and ACC and Big 12 going to even compete?
Yep. And listen, right now in the Big Ten and the SEC, it is an even revenue split. All 18 teams in the Big Ten share the television revenue evenly. You know what's next up? Ohio State and Michigan being like, look at our numbers, look at your numbers. We want 20%. We want 25%. And hey, Northwestern, and hey, Rutgers, and hey, Purdue, you can take our scraps because we are truly the breadwinners in this conference. All for the almighty dollar and bottom line. Lisi has said this a few times, and I think it does need to be stressed before we move on to NFL news and notes on the other side of the break. We have talked about the television partners. We have talked about conference commissioners. We have talked about revenue. We have talked about finances. We have talked about money. The one thing we have not spoken about in these reports is how do the players feel? How do the coaches feel? How do the actual programs themselves feel? And also, Joe, how do the fans feel? Because in most evolving college football and college athletic conversations over the past few years, the things that have been disregarded, the players that play the game and the fans that watch and love the game. And once again, this is not for the betterment of the product, for the players or the fans or the tradition and the history. It is for the betterment of the bottom line. And when you start to only focus on that, you have deeply lost the plot.
Absolutely. And again, kids know where the money is. And it's not just the TV revenue sharing. You mentioned that they equally separate it in the Big Ten, but it's the NIL and the booster money. Yeah. Those kids at Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State are getting much more than the other schools.
Yep. It's an interesting time in college sports, as it always is this time of year in the offseason around college football. Some NFL news and notes up next here on FFC.
We're not saying every SportsGrid listener is a legend, but you might start thinking about who's going to play you in the movie. Just saying. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network.
The apparent leader of a cult-like group known as the Zizians has been arrested in Maryland along with another member of the group, according to Maryland State Police. 34-year-old Jack Soto was arrested Sunday along with 33-year-old Michelle Zashko of Media, Pennsylvania. They face multiple charges including trespassing, obstructing and hindering, and possession of a handgun in a vehicle. A bail hearing for the two is scheduled for today at Allegheny District Court. The Zizians have been tied to the killing of U.S. Border Patrol agent David Malin near the Canadian border in January and 5 other homicides in Vermont, Pennsylvania, and California. Southwest Airlines is eliminating 1,750 jobs, or 15% of its corporate workforce. It's the first major layoffs in the company's 53-year history. The airline said that the job cuts would be focused almost entirely on corporate overhead and leadership positions, including senior leadership and directors. 11 senior leadership positions, representing 15% of the company's senior management committee, are being eliminated. I'm Trey Westerberg with the SportsGrid News Flash.
With Fidelity Wealth Management, a dedicated advisor gets to know you and your goals to build a comprehensive plan to help grow and protect your wealth. Backed by a team of specialists, they'll analyze all your accounts, even the ones they don't manage, to keep an eye on taxes and provide proactive portfolio insights that can help you unlock your wealth's full potential. Learn more at fidelity.com/wealth. Investment minimums apply. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Confidence is knowing you're ready to handle whatever comes your way. That's what it feels like to take on your workday with Cintas. They make sure your AEDs are up to date, your fire extinguishers are tested and inspected, your floor mats are cleaned and delivered, and your workwear looks good, feels good, and is freshly laundered with the Cintas Apparel Plus program. So are you ready to take on today? Visit Cintas.com.
Oh, I'm ready!
And get ready for the workday.
Ask any player and they'll tell you any advantage is important. That's where we come in. SportsGrid delivers gaming strategies and analysis 7 days a week.
The winning edge.
It's your advantage to more winning more often. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network. You're listening to Football Full Circle with Joe Lisi and Ben Stevens.
Live right here on Football Full Circle. It is the football offseason. We just talked some college football. Any updates to the stories of college football playoff expansion with the Big Ten and SEC athletic directors meeting this afternoon in New Orleans? We'll bring you tomorrow. But, Joe, always some news around the National Football League, it would seem, early on in the offseason as well. An uneasy offseason ahead once again in Cincinnati with so many contracts and pay tabs that need to be filled this offseason. Of course, T. Higgins, currently a free agent. Jamar Chase entering the final year of his rookie deal, looking for a very rich contract extension. Trey Hendrickson led the NFL in sacks in 2024. He finished runner-up in Defensive Player of the Year voting, now looking for his own new extension. Their quarterback, Joe Burrow, who got paid 2 off seasons ago, has been the guy politicking and campaigning for all of his guys to be paid and stay in Cincinnati. And we got this report yesterday from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. The Bengals in-house right now are reportedly planning to spend big to keep their core intact. That means pay Jamar Chase, what could be a record-setting deal. Pay Trey Hendrickson as one of the highest paid defensive linemen in the NFL. And Joe, even keep T. Higgins, potentially franchise tagging the wide receiver for a second consecutive year just to make sure he stays in Cincy so they can continue to negotiate a long-term extension. All sounds great on paper, but you eventually have to pick up the tab, which is something that Mike Brown, the Bengals owner, has not really been all that willing to do, at least in financial obligations in years past.
It's got alligator arms, as we say, It's like, hey, Mike, you ordered $500 worth of food and you want to throw in $150. Get real, guy. I mean, come on. We talk about money talks and BS walks, and this is what it is. It's either time to put up or shut up if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. You need to really obviously make Joe Burrow happy, and what would make him happy is having, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase there in that lineup. They've made a run at a potential Super Bowl a couple of years, and it's been a long time since that has happened. But at the end of the day, you need to have that nucleus happy and intact from a health standpoint. And if they're both getting paid and I'm talking about Higgins and Chase, you have a much better shot to compete for an AFC championship with both of those players then potentially off the roster or not 100% bought in. I think T. Higgins proved, hey, he was up to par and he had one of his best seasons, playing under the franchise tag. Now pay the guy. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't get it. I understand what they're trying to do from a business aspect, but you're the Cincinnati Bengals. You've been a losing organization prior to Joe Burrow getting there. Your last time at a heyday was when Sam Weiss was head coach with Ickey Woods and Ken Anderson at quarterback. Get real. Pay the best players and maybe have a shot. You have a generational talent at the quarterback position, and everything is for the taking potentially in the AFC. You're a few players on the defensive side of the ball, maybe from the draft, that getting there. Pay them. So, Joe.
Absolutely so. You have to pay them. But Mike Brown has not really been all that willing to pay. In fact, refusing to pay. Because if Mike Brown was proactive and had some financial foresight, Jamar Chase would have been paid last offseason. So that his extension that would be record-setting would be offset by the final 2 years of his discounted rookie deal, and he would actually, based on average annual value, not have to pay as much. Joe Burrow's large contract, the richest in NFL history at the time, which is now larger in base salary than most, if it could be restructured to have a bigger signing bonus and all of that stuff, more cash up front, but less of a cap hit. You can restructure his deal to have more revenue freed up to pay everybody else. As for T. Higgins, who for a while, Joe, had requested a trade and was unhappy, understandably so, paying under the franchise tag in 2024, more than likely will not be thrilled if he is tagged once again for a second consecutive year. You can only tag a guy 2 years in a row before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. If not tagged this offseason, T. Higgins would not be under contract and would be able to negotiate. Joey made $21.8 million this past year in 2024. If you are tagged a second time, that increase is 20%. So still would be making $26.2 million per year. Not a bad payday, but T. Higgins, like many other wide receivers now in the NFL, trying to get into the $30 million club and would certainly garner that kind of contract, Joe, on the open market. There is no doubt that once the league year officially begins on March 12th, if T. Higgins is able to test the free agent waters, he's making at least $30 million a year.
Oh, yeah. And T. Higgins, I still think, has a desire potentially with the right team to be that guy. Like if he were to go to New England, he would be that guy, the number one and showcase his talents. He's the number two behind Chase. So that's always the added maybe potential luring. Take the $30 million and you'll be our number one guy. So you never know. But, it comes down to he's been a consummate professional, and he could definitely help the Cincinnati Bengals get over the hump. And he's been there since the get-go. A national champion in college. He wants to be a champion in the NFL. Pay him. But I think a team like New England or maybe some others that are just on the cusp, New England's a complete rebuild, but some teams that are on the cusp could definitely certainly utilize T. Higgins' attributes and talents.
Yeah, absolutely so. Joe, if he is a free agent, he is the number one wide receiver on the market. The Buffalo Bills would come calling. The Patriots would probably give him anything he wanted to be that top target in New England for their second-year youngster at quarterback in Drake May. The Bengals are trying to prevent that, right? The franchise tag to allow them a longer time to negotiate a long-term deal. If he is tagged in early March in just a few weeks, the Bengals would have until the middle of July to agree to a long-term contract extension, or Higgins would play under the franchise tag for 2025. Again, probably would not be thrilled about that idea. We'll talk about the Bengals even more so. Up next, live right here on Football Full Circle. What are the odds expecting out of Cincy this upcoming season? We'll break it down for you next.
Luck is winning the lottery. Strategy is settling your divorce before cashing in the ticket. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. Get the winning edge. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network. SportsGrid TV and radio networks are the premier streaming video and audio channel dedicated to serving the sports wagering audience. Found on major smart TV platforms and streaming on SportsGrid Radio and SiriusXM Channel 159. SportsGrid's real-time data, expert commentary, and entertaining analysis transform viewers into informed sports enthusiasts. Our weekday radio lineup begins with the early line at 8 a.m. Eastern with Ben Stevens and Donnie Rightside. Donnie joins Kevin Walsh on Money Line at 11 a.m. Eastern, followed by Football Full Circle at noon Eastern. Kaplan and crew join the party at 1 p.m. Eastern, and Pharrell Coast to Coast keeps things rolling from 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Get in the mix with Kevin Walsh and Game Time Decisions at 6 p.m. Eastern. Evenings simmer with Carver and Lisi, then boils over with Gabe Moritzi on Sports Rage Late Night at 10 p.m. Eastern. To find out where to find SportsGrid that's best for you, go to sportsgrid.com. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
How would you like to get high-speed internet for your home for less than $2 a day? That's right. For about $50 a month, you'll get lightning-fast internet. Are you paying less than $50 a month right now for your internet? Then call Whole Home Connect right now for blazing fast internet at $50 a month with no price increases, no hidden fees, no contracts, no upfront costs, no equipment fees. It's a great deal. And guess what? You can try it for 15 days. If you don't like it, you get your money back. But you're gonna love it, and you're gonna love the price. Internet for your home for $50 a month. That's less than $2 a day. Plus, no contracts, no upfront costs, no equipment fees, and our 15-day guarantee. Call now. 800-797-1292. 800-797-1292. 800-797-1292. That's 800-797-1292.
Think of us as your cool roommate that has this innate gift of somehow always picking winners and never bugs you about doing the dishes or paying rent. Sports gaming strategies and information 24/7. Get the winning edge. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network. You're listening to Football Full Circle with Joe Lisi and Ben Stevens.
Live right here on Football Full Circle, it is FFC. So the Bengals are committed to making sure they retain their young and talented core. That means paying T. Higgins, paying Jamar Chase, paying Trey Hendrickson, and I'm sure many more. Jermaine Pratt, their defensive leader, who has been in Cincy for all 6 years of his career, who requested a trade last week and was the Bengals' leading tackler in 2024, also probably wants to see an extension of his own. Joe, when you look at the Super Bowl 60 odds for the Bengals, they saw some drastic movement right away in the market. When it opened, posted at 24-1 for the Super Bowl odds next year, now down by $7, 17-1. But the Bengals behind the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Bills in the AFC. KC and Baltimore now 7-1. Buffalo plus 750. You basically go $10 back to get to Cincinnati. I would tell you right here, right now, the Bengals have value with that Super Bowl price as an AFC contender, in my estimation. If we take Mike Brown at his word and we trust the Bengals front office to sign everybody and extend everybody this offseason, but until I see that actually happen, I remain a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, I mean, as long as Burrow's healthy, they're going to be within, the 20-1 price, right? And obviously, if they pay Chase, they have a legitimate shot. The defense needs a major upgrade, new defensive coordinator intact. So what's going to happen with that? But again, I think it's priced just right now. In terms of the 17-1. Let's not forget they were prior to last year, they were in the area of about 10, 12-1. They were right there neck and neck with Buffalo. Right on the cusp, maybe you saw some plus 950s prior to the start of the season. So, and knowing how they traditionally start slow, you gotta believe one of these years, right, that they start, at the very worst 500 after the month of September. I mean, if not, then maybe Zach Taylor's dead man walking too, because 17-1 is a legitimate shot as long as Burrow's healthy.
I believe, Joe, they have now started 0-2. In each of the last 3 seasons. Not how you draw it up by any means, to build yourself that hole, to dig yourself that hole, and then try to get out of it. And yet, Cincy still finished with a winning record at 9-8 in 2024, despite a dismal start to this season. If they could start 2-0, heck, 3-0, 4-0, where would that leave this Bengals team? But, Joe, of course, their best opportunity to do just that and have success from the very start is to keep everybody in-house. You are a betting man, as am I. If you had to bet, if I set the over-under, Joe, at 2.5, that Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson all get a new contract or an extended contract this offseason, would you take the over or the under?
Probably the over. And again, and take Hendrickson out of the equation, because let's just assume they had the worst defense in the NFL. With those three, they could outscore anybody, right? So that's right. They were 9-8 with a terrible defense last year. So yeah, even if Hendrickson doesn't get signed, I gotta believe that they gotta be somewhat better with a new DC. As long as you got the big three, I would take that bet over.
Yeah, and that's going to be a big thing right there, right? That's going to be a big, big way for Cincinnati to make sure that Joe Burrow is happy, that Jamar Chase is happy, that T. Higgins is happy. But, Joe, despite what that offense can be, a world beater at times, they are going to need even an average defense, because this year's defense was not great, leading to the dismissal of Lou Anarumo as the defensive coordinator. We shall see. 17-1 the price on the Bengals. Joe, as I was looking at those Super Bowl 60 odds, you know who has also seen some drastic movement in just over a week since these odds were posted at the end of Super Bowl 59? San Francisco 49ers opened at a 17-1 price. They're now down to 12-1, only $3 back of the Lions, less than half of the price or double the price behind the Philadelphia Eagles. The Niners, of course, were the favorites to win the NFC entering this year. The odds makers have a little bit of belief in San Fran.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's maybe McCaffrey's a little bit ahead of schedule. Maybe he is going to return. Maybe there's some rumblings they're going to potentially sign Brock Purdy. There's inside information being leaked, right? And they were hampered by injuries. So would I bet on them this year? No, I wouldn't. I think they're on the back end as opposed to one of those teams to compete. They can bounce back and prove me wrong, but I wouldn't bet on it right now in the month of February.
I would agree. He's Joe Lisi. I'm Ben Stevens. Football Full Circle returns tomorrow, noon Eastern time on SportsGrid Radio.
Now you've done it. You found the advantage for gaming, odds, and more. But we call it the winning edge for short. This is the SportsGrid Radio Network.